All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Martin Harry. I'm here to testify in favor of SB 7 and 94. I'm testifying in my individual capacity. The objective for this legislation is one principle. Government should not support any particular private political interest. There's been a great deal of debate about the costs to the government associated with withholding and direct payment of dues, but this is a red herring. It isn't the cost to the government that is important, but rather than it's the benefit to the organization that's important. It's a distinctly different matter. The first opponent last session was ATPE. ATPE brought its executive director and many of its members to the Capitol to testify. According to its website, ATPE employs 7 lobbyists. After the executive director testified that the bill was intended to silence teachers all across Texas, Senator Zaffirini asked him what impact this law would have on the organization. He stated it would reduce the number of members and have a chilling effect. That's the word that he used, was chilling. This answer tells you all that you need to know about how great the benefit is to the organization. If the effect of ceasing the government's withholding and direct payment will decrease political and lobbying activities by the organization, then the converse must be true too. The government's withholding and payment of dues currently increases the political and lobbying activities of the organization. And that clearly violates the principle that government should not support any private political interest. Many of the witnesses who testified last session claimed that ATPE dues do not fund political activities. This talking point is dishonest because it creates a false impression. The term political activity is a term of art under the tax code that refers to advocacy for political candidates. It is distinguishable from lobbying activity or issue advocacy. I've provided all of you text from the ATPE website that shows 12% of the association dues is used for lobbying, which is described as advocating for ATPE's philosophy and policies. Now, I have no objection to...
I have a question.
Just one final sentence. Now, I have no objection to the ATPE and its members advocating against school choice and even the legislation today, but I do object to the government supporting this activity in any form or fashion.
Where are you from?
I'm from Austin, Texas.
What do you do?
I'm an attorney.
If I wanted to, for the sake of discussion, accept your points as factual, which obviously I don't, how do you sit there and support something that would exempt some employees? For instance, policemen, fire, who live in a dangerous environment. But this gentleman, and I apologize for leaving out parole officers, what a real glaring example of someone that puts their lives on the line daily, go out into very dangerous neighborhoods by themselves, enter homes by themselves. So how do you reconcile that this gentleman is no longer going to be allowed to have dues check off voluntarily, but are the hospital worker in an emergency dangerous environment? How do you reconcile the two?
Well, I think
that police and fire are exempt.
Well, I think if you're going to be consistent with the principle that the government should not support any private political interests, that it would be across the board. But I understand that there are exceptions made in this case because of the
I mean, you seem like a very principled person. I mean, like I said, I don't agree with your premises, but you obviously are very passionate about your deal, and that's why we are proud to live in America. So you have a right in this process to state your position. But how can you sit there and do it so passionately, but then you participate in legislation that exempts two?
I'd be happy to answer your question, sir.
Go for it.
I believe it's based on the distinction from of these occupations. The state is recognizing that firefighters go to burning buildings to save people. Police officers go to violent crime scenes to defend individuals.
Have you ever been
we
to
have
a prison?
emergency medical.
Have you ever been in a prison?
Sir, I'm trying to finish my thought. Emergency medical technicians do the same thing, go to the same scenes, burning buildings to do the same thing. Their job entails a risk of loss of life to themselves, physical harm to themselves. When you walk into a classroom, you're not facing that risk on a day-to-day basis. You may encounter the same dangers, but that's not the risk that you're incurring on a day-to-day basis. There is specific legislation, disability benefits are based on the heightened risk to the police officers, firefighters, and emergency medical technicians. So the state makes those kinds of distinctions.
And I keep getting the benefit of the doubt that that you believe in what you're saying, but I would just really, because if you're going to sit there and testify about the lack of dangers of the teaching profession, you need to go with me to a junior high on Scott Street, just down the street from U of H. I visited the 600 students last fall. You know what the number one, I asked the principal, what is your number one problem? Do you have any idea what he told me? Gang activity. Because of the housing project across the street, when the gangs, teenage gangs, start fighting, you know where they seek refuge? In the junior high. Very dangerous environment. The parole officer, the correction officer. So I think it's just, you just point out how political this is and how you pick and choose who you really want as opponent. You don't want police and firemen down here because they got a lot of clout.
There's a rational difference between a firefighter, police
but not
officer.
The principles of government not collecting dues for them. You're talking about the nature of their work. I'm talking about the principle of this government not collecting dues. It's all right for some, not for others.
But there's a rational basis, and that's all that's necessary to sustain this policy and exception.
Thank you.
Thank you, panel. Next, we have Scott Lee.